The colony of New Avalon was meant to stand as a monument to human ambition, a shining outpost at the edge of the galaxy. It had demanded decades of labor, billions of credits, and the blood of countless pioneers to forge a declaration that humanity was no longer bound to Earth's cradle. Then, in a single day, it was gone. The distress call had lasted only moments, a fractured signal caught by a passing merchant ship, before silence consumed the world. No survivors, no wreckage. Only a barren husk where a thriving city had lived. The assailants left nothing behind, no warning, no demand, not even a name. They had wiped New Avalon from existence as if it had never been. But humanity remembered. And humanity would never forgive. Admiral Jonathan Graves stood on the bridge of the UN's retribution, eyes locked on the tactical display before him. It was a terrifying sight, a fleet unlike any ever seen in human history, gathered for a single purpose: vengeance. 700,000 warships, the combined strength of every Terran fleet, every colonial navy, every mercenary band that had answered the call. From nimble corvettes to towering dreadnoughts, the armada stretched across the stars like a storm unleashed. For the first time, humanity stood united, not for politics, not for trade, not even for survival, but for retribution. ETA to enemy system? Graves asked. 4 days, Admiral. His XO, Commander Vasquez, answered with a grim nod. Scouts confirmed their position. We know who's responsible. Graves exhaled slowly. Who? Vasquez's jaw clenched. The Zorak Dominion. An ancient warrior empire. They likely thought we were nothing, just another weak race, easy prey. A low growl rippled through the bridge crew. The Zorak had made a fatal misjudgment. Graves turned to the viewport, staring at the vast fleet encircling his flagship. They thought wrong. The Zorak were ancient, their dominion forged across millennia of conquest and blood. They had crushed dozens of civilizations, burned worlds beyond counting, and fought wars before humanity had learned to tame fire. But this time, they had miscalculated. Humanity did not plead. Humanity did not bow. Humanity brought war. 700,000 human warships surged into Zorak space in a storm of fire and steel. The first planetary defense stations barely managed to raise their shields before nuclear firestorms reduced them to molten slag. Their fleets scrambled, commanders shouting fractured orders, unprepared for what awaited them. They had expected a raid, perhaps a token reprisal. Instead, they were met with annihilation. Missiles streaked across the void by the millions, kinetic. Slugs tearing battleships apart with terrifying ease. And when human marines set foot on the ground, they took no prisoners. Colony after colony collapsed. The proud dominion and empire that had endured for millennia buckled beneath the sheer, merciless weight of human fury. No treaties were offered, no terms demanded. There was only vengeance. And humanity had only begun. The Zorak High Council had never known fear. For centuries they had ruled through terror, their fleets unstoppable, their warriors supreme. But now, for the first time in their long, brutal reign, they understood what it meant to be hunted. Reports poured in from every sector. The humans had arrived in force. Their warships, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, advanced with relentless precision, burning through every defense the Dominion mustered. Worlds that had knelt to Zorak rule for ages were reduced to smoldering ruin. Aboard the UN's retribution, Admiral Graves listened as fresh battle reports came in. Sir, enemy stronghold on Vlok 7 neutralized. Resistance was fierce, but the capital was secured within 6 hours. Graves nodded. Casualties? The tactical officer hesitated. Minimal, sir. Fewer than 1,000 dead. In any other war, such a loss would have been staggering. But not this one, not after New Avalon. Graves studied the holographic map of Zorak space. In just 2 weeks, a third of their empire lay in ashes. Admiral, Vasquez said tightly, we've intercepted transmissions. They're summoning reinforcements from their core systems. Preparing for a last stand. A grim smile touched Graves's lips. Good, he said. Let them come. On the Zorak homeworld of Cthulhu, Supreme Warlord Zvir watched his empire unravel. The humans moved with a speed and violence he had never thought possible. They didn't just fight, they eradicated. Entire fleets gone within hours, whole worlds reduced to cinders. They sought no compromise, offered no mercy. In the council chamber, a desperate minister pleaded, "We must surrender, give them anything." Zvir's fangs bared in a snarl. His voice was low, final. They do not want surrender. They want revenge. Zvir growled, and the word sent a shudder through the chamber. Then, what do we do? Another counselor whispered. The warlord closed his eyes. He had studied humanity, misjudged them. He had believed them fragile, as countless empires had before. But now, as their fleets blackened his skies, he understood the truth. The humans were monsters, and nothing could stop them. The Zorak dominion was dying. Once, their fleets had spread like a plague, crushing species that dared defy them. Now that same dominion burned. From the bridge of the UNS Retribution, Admiral Graves watched the chaos above Cthulhu. The holodisplay rippled with shifting fleet markers, updating every second. Humanity's armada had arrived in its full fury, a wall of steel and fire stretching across the void. Hundreds of thousands of warships, relentless and immovable. The Zorak fleet was immense, but against this storm they were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and utterly outmatched. Enemy forces engaging, Commander Vasquez reported. They're throwing everything they have. Graves didn't blink. They're dying fast, Vasquez added, a grim smirk tugging at her lips. The battle was savage, but its outcome had been sealed before the first cannon fired. For all their millennia of war, the Zorak had never faced anything like mankind. Human fleets didn't march in rigid lines. They didn't fracture under pressure. They shifted, adapted, devoured fighting with a ferocity that froze even veteran Zorak warriors. Tactical nukes streaked through the darkness, detonating inside enemy formations. Kinetic slugs, fired at near-light speeds, tore through battleships, reducing them to glowing shards. Swarms of fighter drones engulfed carriers, slicing through shields like blades through flesh. The Zorak resisted with desperation, their very home at stake, but it was never enough. "Admiral, the enemy flagship is in range," a lieutenant called. Graves gave no pause. Fire. The Retribution's main cannon roared. A skyscraper-sized mass driver launched a tungsten slug the size of a shuttle, accelerated to relativistic speed. It smashed through the Zorak command ship before shields could respond. The vessel tore apart in an instant, exploding into nothing. Cheers broke across the bridge, but Graves's face remained stone. "Status on planetary defenses?" "Surface cannons still firing, sir," Vasquez said. "But they're failing our bombardments, ripping them down." Graves nodded once. "Then we begin the next phase." On Kathra's surface, Supreme Warlord Zvir looked to the heavens in despair. The sky itself was a flamefire. Humanity's bombardment had begun high above the human fleet, wreaking a destruction. Upon his world, cities that had stood for thousands of years were turned to rubble in seconds. Entire mountain ranges shattered under orbital strikes. The oceans boiled as warships unleashed their fury. The Zorak had waged war for centuries, had committed genocidian dozens of species. They had believed themselves unstoppable. But now, as their own world was torn apart, they knew fear. A transmission flickered on the warlord's command screen. A human face appeared. Admiral Graves. His expression was unreadable. "This is what happens when you cross humanity," Graves said, his voice like cold steel. "You wiped out our colony. You thought you could erase us." He leaned closer to the screen. "Now we erase you." Zvir swallowed. His pride he had never begged before, but now he had Nakoi's human. He growled, lowering his head slightly. "Was surrender." There was a long silence. Then GR Waves Spakino. The transmission cut out a moment later. The sky split apart as the final bombardment began. Cathra burned. The war was over, and humanity had won. The war was over, but the rage still burned. Cathro had been reduced to a husk. Its once proud cities turned to mountains of ash and rubble. The ocean still boiled from orbital bombardments, and the air was thick with smoke, and the sent-off death fires raged across the shattered landscape, consuming the remains of aeons. Great civilization. Admiral Graves stood in the command deck of the UN's Retribution, staring at the ruined world below. The Zorak's dominion had fallen there. Fleets were destroyed, their armies crushed, their people left broken, and yet he felt no satisfaction. They're sending surrender requests from across their remaining colonies. Commander Vasquez reported, every Zork's world left standing is begging for terms. Graves exhaled slowly. He had known this would happen. The Zorak had believed themselves invincible, but when faced with total annihilation, their will had shattered. The same species that had enslaved, massacred, and conquered countless others were now pleading for mercy. They're offering reparations. Vasquez continued, they're promising Tadasan to disband their empire completely. Graves said nothing for a long moment. Outside the viewport, the last human dropships were finishing their sweeps of Cathra. The ground war had been a slaughter. The Zorak defenders had fought, but with no fleet to support them, it had been hopeless. Human Marines had torn through their last bastions of resistance, executing every military leader they could find. Their race deserves extinction, a voice growled behind him. Graves too. File. The Zorak had been the first, but they would not be the last. And if the galaxy wanted to test humanity again, it would burn just the same. The galaxy hadn't forgotten. 6 months after the fall of the Zorak dominion, humanity stood unmatched. Its fleets were the most feared in the known universe, its soldiers hardened by war. Every species that had onset as missed humanity as insignificant now watched them with wary eyes, but not all of them watched in silence. A storm was coming. Admiral Graves sat in the war room of the UNS Eternity, the new flagship of the United Terran Directorate. Around him, holographic projectors displayed intelligence reports gathered from the edges of known space. The signs were unmystical. They call themselves Accord of Sovereign Worlds. Vasquez reported, her voice clipped. 5 species, once enemies, now allied under one purpose, containing humanity. Graves exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the projection. The Accord wasn't just a political pact, it was an emergency coalition formed by species who had never trusted each other, who had fought wars against one another for centuries. Now they had put aside their hatred because they feared something more. They feared humanity. O'Neill seat across the table let out a low chuckle. 5 species banding together just to stop little old us. I'd say that's flattering. No, Grav said, voice steady. That's dangerous. The Zorks had been powerful, but they had been alone, isolated, arrogant. The Accord was different. It was coordinated, intelligent, and it had own goal to make sure humanity never again wielded the kind of power it had used to wipe out the Zorks. They're already moving, Vasquez continued. They've reinforced border systems, doubled their fleets, intercepted communications confirming joint military exercises. They're preparing for war. Graves leaned back, his fingers steepled. The war with the Zorak had been swift, brutal, but this would be something else entirely. He turned to O'Neill. What the status of our forces? The general smirked. Stronger, Thanavir knew. Avalon's destruction woke something up in U.S. Admiral recruitment rates are at an all-time high. Every colony is churning out warships and weapons like their lives depend on it. His expression darkened. Because they do. Graves nodded. Humanity had won its war of vengeance, but the price had been transformation. They were no longer the species that had once sought peace among stars. They were now something far more dangerous. We need to strike first, Vasquez said firmly. We can't let them box us in. Graves didn't answer immediately. He stared at the galactic map, the cold vastness of space, filled with the colors of hostile factions. The Accord thought they could contain humanity, thought they could put a leash on the species that had just wiped an empire from existence. They were wrong. Slowly, Graves stood. His voice, when spoke, was calm. Prepare the fleets. Vasquez and O'Neill exchanged a glance. We're going to war. O'Neill asked though there was no hesitation. In his voice, Graves's eyes were like steel. We never stopped. The galaxy had drawn its line, and now humanity would teach them what it meant to cross them. The galaxy stood on the edge of war. The Accord of Sovereign Worlds had united 5 powerful species. Sworn enemies now, bound by a single cause containing humanity before it became unstoppable. They reinforced their borders, mass-produced warships, and stockpiled weapons they thought they could intimidate humanity into submission. They were wrong, Admiral. Graves stood on the bridge of the UNS Eternity, humanity's most advanced warship, staring at the tactical display. A line of red markers stretched across the galactic map. A Ord fleet stationed along every major hyperlane leading into human space. Blockade is nearly complete. A warning, a challenge. Graves didn't hesitate. All fleets prepare for engagement. The officers around him didn't question the order. There was no debate. The time for diplomacy had passed. The moment the Accord declared humanity a threat now, there was only one response. War. The UNS Eternity led the charge in the Solari system. The Accord's fleet commander, High Warden Threx, watched his scanners as thousands of human warships exited hyperspace. Impossible, he muttered. He had expected at a slow build-up negotiations, the usual hesitation that came before war. But humanity hadn't waited. They had launched their attack without warning. Alarms blared across the command deck. The human fleet was already deploying fighter swarms and targeting Accord capital ships. Energy spikes signaled the charging of railguns and mass drivers. Humanity hadn't come to posture. They had come to kill. Raise shields, all weapons fire. Threx roared. But it was too late. The first battle of the war lasted less than an hour. The Accord fleet was shattered. What had been intended as an impenetrable blockade became a massacre. The UNS Eternity alone had annihilated 3 battleships with precision orbital strikes. Kinetic rounds traveling at near light speeds tore through enemy holes as if they were made of paper. The survivors fled. The message was clear. Humanity would not be contained. The news spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Species watched in stunned silence as human forces pushed forward, smashing through Accord's defenses with ruthless efficiency. On the Accord's Council world of Vandros Prime, the ruling speciescard in a desperate emergency session. Holograms flickered with footage of human warships carving through their fleet's soldiers in advanced power armor, storming planetary deafness. They don't fight like the Zoraka Caviar. Diplomat hiss. They don't hold formations. They don't retreat. They don't hesitate. Agari warlord slammed his fist against the table. Then we need to strike harder. We outnumber them 5-1. Aslam voice cut through the argument. It doesn't matter. All eyes turned to the Solari representative. His species had fought humanity at the Solari system. They had seen what the others had. Not they fight like they've already won her. Said silence fell over the chamber. The war had only just begun, and already the Accord was afraid. On the bridge of the Eternity, Graves watched as his fleets spread like wildfire. Planets fell. Enemy fleets were obliterated, and the Accord's lines crumbled faster than anyone had predicted. But he knew this was only the beginning. They would regroup. They would strike back. Good, let them try. Graves turned to Vasquez. Prepare the next assault. We take the Caviar stronghold next. Vasquez nodded, and after that, Graves's lips curled into a cold smile. We don't stop until they beg for mercy. The war had begun, and humanity would finish it. The Accord was reeling. What was supposed to be a containment effort had turned into an unrelenting nightmare. Human warships had torn through the Solari system, leaving behind only wreckage and death. The outer defenses of the Accord had been shattered in days, not months, and now the United Terran Directorate was pushing deeper into enemy space. Admiral Graves stood at the heart of it all, watching as the greatest military machine humanity had ever built ground its enemies. Totus, the Caviar stronghold, was next. An ancient race, the Caviar had on Speen warlords who dominated entire sectors. Their homeworld, Vandros 9, was a fortress protected by planetary shields, automated defense turrets, and a fleet stationed in permanent orbit. It was considered an impenetrable bastion. Humanity didn't care. The UNS Eternity, the charge backed by the 2nd and 5th Expeditionary Fleets. 7 Warships more than the Zurich had ever faced at once surged forward. They emerged from hyperspace in a perfect formation, their arrival accompanied by the deafening silence of the void. Just before hell erupted, Caviar warships launched interceptors and missile swarms, energy cannons powered up, and planetary defense systems locked onto human vessels. The battlefield became a swirling storm of plasma fire rail, gun rounds, and detonations as both sides clashed, but the humans had come prepared. Tactical AI synchronized the fleet's movements with near-perfect precision. Capital ships laid down devastating suppressive fire, while smaller strike groups weaved through the chaos, cutting through Caviar defenses like blades through flesh. The Uncertainty deployed its Dreadnought-class railguns, each round traveling at near light speed, obliterating enemy ships in single shots on the bridge. Graves watched the chaos unfold. Planetary shields are holding Vasquez, reported Weckmead. Ground for Chesto breach. Graves nodded. The Marines. The order sent thousands off drop pods, screaming through Vros 99's atmosphere. The planetary shields, weakened by the orbital bombardment, flickered as the first wave broke through. Then the real battle began. General O'Neill led the charge, clad in advanced power armor, wielding a high-caliber plasma rifle. He and his troops stormed the capital city of Luoz Primeth. Caviar had deployed thousands of ground troops, their towering war machines lumbering through the streets, firing barrages of plasma fire. But human soldiers weren't just warriors, they were killers. O'Neill's men moved in tight, efficient squads. Drones scouted enemy positions, feeding real-time data to combat. 2D's grenades arced over cover. EMP bursts disabled enemy mechs, and sniper teams eliminated Caviar officers with terrifying precision. A massive Caviar walker turned the corner, its Shivi cannons glowing. O'Neill didn't hesitate. He raised his wrist, marking the target with a simple voice command: Valkyrie strike. Sector 3B. From above, a hypersonic human aircraft screamed downward, releasing a payload of tungsten rods. The projects, southwarded to near terminal velocity, struck the walker like meteors, reducing it to molten slag. O'Neill grinned. Push forward. The battle raged for hours. Streets burned, buildings crumbled, and the once mighty Caviar warriors fell one by one. They had expected a siege. Instead, they got an execution by nightfall. The Caviar government was in ruins. Vandros 9, once a stronghold, was now just another human conquest. O'Neill stood atop the shattered remains of the Caviar command center, raising the Terran banner. The bridge with unshakable resolve. Then let's teach them what happens when you back humanity into a corner. The Battle of Earth would be remembered for millennia. The Accord fleet exited purpose just beyond the Sol system, weapons primed, expecting to find Earth vulnerable. Instead, they found the largest human armada ever assembled. 700 warships. Every Terran fleet had been recalled. Every colony had sent reinforcements. Every last resource humanity could muster had been funneled into this moment. The Accord expected a battle. What they got was an extinction event, the void between. The fleets turned it into a hellscape of fire and destruction. Human dreadnoughts unleashed rail gun rounds the size of city buses, tearing through enemy ships like paper swarms of teen fighter craft, moved with coordinated precision, executing complex maneuvers that shattered enemy formations. The Eternity spearheaded the assault, its experimental weapon systems cutting through the largest Accord warships with ease. Plasma lances seared through hulls, while kinetic slugs turned battlecruisers into drifting debris. The Accord fought back with everything they had. Their warships outnumbered humanity's, but numbers didn't matter anymore. Humanity had been fighting this war for survival from the moment New Avalon burned. They had been reforged in blood and fire. And now they were unstoppable. On the Accord command ship, panic spread. They're overwhelming us. A Solari officer cried out. We can't. A kinetic round slammed through the command deck, tearing half the ship apart in an instant. Explosions rippled through fleet as ship after ship was obliterated. Admiral Graves watched it all unfold, eyes cold, voice steady. Show them no mercy. The battle lasted 12 hours. By the end, the Accord fleet was gone. 20 warships had entered Sol. None had survived. Humanity had won the Accord had gambled everything and lost. Their military was broken. Their leadership shattered. The survivors fled there. Coalition in ruins on Earth. Billions of humans cheered. Across the stars, colonies rejoiced. But on the bridge of the Eternity, Admiral Graves wasn't celebrating. He knew what came next. This war wasn't over. It was time to take the fight to them. Humanity would not be contained. Humanity would rule. Fewer was no longer about survival. Humanity had crushed the Cord's attempt to wipe out Earth. Their 20-0 ship armada had been annihilated. Their fleets shattered. Their military left in ruin spot. Admiral Graves knew one truth about war: if you left the enemy alive, they would return. And humanity did not believe in second chances. Now it was time for vengeance. The invasion of the Accord's core worlds began with brutal efficiency. Humanity launched a campaign that spanned entire star systems. Every fleet, every warship, every soldier that Earth could spare was mobilized. The days of defending human space were over. Now humanity was bringing the war to the Accord's doorstep. The first target, the Gari homeworld, the planet Zos 4, was a technological marvel. Massive orbital stations, planetary defense grids, and an active IAO ring around the planet that housed most of their industrial power. It had stood untouched for centuries. No enemy had ever breached its defenses. Then humanity arrived. 700 warships had gathered in Earth's defense. They moved outward like a vengeful storm, sweeping through space, leaving nothing but debris behind. Admiral Graves stood on the bridge of the Eternity, watching the planet loom closer. A cold fury burned in his chest. He had lost friends. He had watched the Accord massacre. Human colonies had seen innocent families burn from orbit. Now it was their turn to suffer. All ships. Graves said, his voice like steel. Comments: bombardment. The sky above Zos 4 burned. Human dreadnoughts unleashed tungsten rods, size of skyscrapers, each one slamming into the surface with the force of a nuclear detonation. Plasma lances cut through orbital stations, sending fire and wreckage spiraling toward Theplanet below Gari. Warships scrambled to defend their home, but they were already too late. Human fighter squadrons weaved through their defenses. Precision striking shield generators and key infrastructure special forces teams deployed onto the surface, assassinating high-value targets before the enemy even knew they were under attack. The Gari had once prided themselves on their tactical superiority. Now they were running for their lives. General O'Neill led the ground assault as the first waves of drop ships broke through the planet's atmosphere. Anti-air defenses opened fire, filling the sky with plasma bolts. Some human ships were hit, spiraling into the cityscape below, but most made it through. O'Neill and his men landed in the middle of the Gara capital. The Kuf city was already in chaos. Fires raged through towering skyscrapers. Streets were filled with terrified civilians scrambling for cover as human mechs marched through the rebel Thagari. Military tried to push back. Their shock troopers, clad in advanced battle armor, engaged the human marines in brutal street-to-street combat. Energy weapons flared. Explosions ripped through buildings and screams echoed through the burning ruins. But the humans had come prepared. Sniper teams eliminated Gari officers before they could issue orders. Drone swarms overloaded enemy targeting systems. EMP strikes disabled their tanks, leaving them vulnerable to devastating missile barges. O'Neill's team moved fast, cutting through enemy resistance like a scalpel. As they pushed toward the Gara Common Center, he activated his Admiral. The capital's defenses are collapsing. The enemy is in full retreat. Graves's voice came through, cold and merciless. Then finish it. O'Neill did not hesitate. He raised his plasma rifle and led his men forward. By nightfall, Zos 4 belonged to humanity. The Gari government had been executed. The remaining military forces surrendered, and those who didn't, they were wiped out. Across the planet, human forces secured control. Their flag was raised above the ruins of the capital, a grim reminder that humanity did not forgive. The Accord had thought they could exterminate humans. Instead, they had sealed their own fate. Admiral Graves stood on the bridge of the Eternity, watching the burning PL planet below. Vasquez exhaled. That's 2 core worlds down. O'Neill voice came through the come again. The Gari are done. What's next? Graves didn't even blink. The Solari home World Vasquez's flickered with dark amusement were not stopping. Are we? Graves turned towards the galactic map, showing the remaining Accord worlds. His jaw tightened. They wanted a war, he said, voice low. Dangerous. Now we give them one. Conquest of the Accord had begun, and humanity would not stop until the galaxy was theirs. The Solari home world of Vajir was the jewel of the Accord. It was a planet of towering crystalline spires, floating citadels, and lush bioluments and forests that stretched for miles, unlike the industrial worlds of the Gary or the Warforged. Fortresses of the Kavir. Vajir was a place of peace, art and diplomacy. It had never seen war on its surface until now. Admiral Graves stared at the holographic projection of the planet. Even from orbit, Vajir was breathtaking, its twin moons casting a pale glow over the sapphire oceans. He almost felt bad for what was about to happen. Almost the Solari were the ones who started this war. Vasquez muttered, standing beside him. They whispered in the ears of the other species, pushed them to attack our colonies. Now look where it got them. Graves didn't respond. Instead, headed to his officers. Deploy the Fleet 700. 0 warships burned through the void, their engines leaving trails of fire as they descended upon Vajir. Solar defense stations scrambled to react, their fleet mobilizing in a desperate attempt to repel the invasion. Their warships were sleek, elegant, built for precision strikes rather than brute force. They had been designed to win through diplomacy, through superior tactics, through carefully calculated intelligence. They had never fought an enemy like humanity. The first exchange lasted minutes. Solari fleet opened fire, unleashing energy lances that cut through space with pinpoint accuracy. Human dreadnoughts responded with brutal efficiency. Railguns the size of skyscrapers fired hypersonic rounds that tore through shields, slicing ships in half before their crews could even react. Missiles swarmed through the battlefield, artificial intelligence guiding them past countermeasures, slamming into holes with devastating force. The Solari fought bravely, but bravery meant nothing against overwhelming firepower. In less than an hour, their navy Wascone planetary defenses activated. Vajir's surface was protected by a shield network designed to withstand orbital bombardment. The Solari had believed it was impenetrable, an absolute safeguard against any invasion. They were wrong. Humanity had already faced these kinds of defenses in past battles. They had learned. They had adapted. A fleet of stealth bombers slipped past the outer defenses, deploying specialized payloads, designato overload shield harmonics. The moment the energy field flickered, even for Asican human battleships unleashed their full might. Tungsten rods fell from orbit, striking with the force of nuclear warheads. The first impact turned a city into dust. The second cracked the surface off a continent. The shield network collapsed within minutes. The invasion had begun. General O'Neill led the first wave. Dropships descended through the atmosphere, dodging sporadic anti-air fire as they deployed human forces across key strategic points. The Solari had no standing army. Their soldiers were ceremonial, trained for peacekeeping, not war. They were slaughtered mechs the size of buildings marched through the Elegancities, their plasma cannons cutting down whatever resistance remained. Drones worms blanketed the skies, seeking out and destroying enemy strongholds. Before they could organize, O'Neill and his Marines pushed through the capital, moving street by street. Solari civilians screamed in terror as the fighting drew closer. Some tried to run, others begged for mercy. O'Neill gave none. These we